name's Julian, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make hard Gabber style techno in the style of Pawlowski, in particular the demonic dimension style on possessions. As usual, you can get the full project file, samples, MIDI, presets, everything like that from this video is available right at the top of the description on my Bandcamp for just $5, and if you're patient on my Patreon, check there because it's already available. And let's dive in. Alright, right off the bat, we're at 165 BPM, definitely a lot faster for techno, but of course, if we're trying to bring in that sort of more like Gabber, hard techno, 90s influence, that really helps. And the first sound that we have here is the rumble kick. So the way you make this rumble is pretty straightforward. So we have our main kick, just this very fat, hard techno style 909. And then we're using the same exact kick to make the rumble. And the way that I'm making this rumble is pretty straightforward. It's a little bit different from the way that I've been doing it recently. Basically what it is, it's the main kick. It's going through a bit of reverb. And then amp, which as you can hear really brings out the rumbliness. And then a low pass filter. And so the reason why this is a little bit different, and then we also have it sidechained to the main kick. The reason why this is a little bit different is a lot of times recently we've been doing like this. Like having the kick do 16th notes into the reverb. We can hear when you're really fast like this, that doesn't actually sound that good. So you really just kind of want to have like a... And then that's going to fit really well under the kick. The other thing that I noticed here when I was checking this with some references is that where you put the low pass filter is going to be really important. Like this is completely different from that. And it's literally just like 100 hertz, the difference between those. But you really want to take your time and play with that, because that's going to make your kick completely different, especially when you have like the parts where it would just be... having that extra rumble coming through can really make a big difference. And then on the group of the kick and the bass together, I have a little bit of saturation. And this is another thing that I haven't been doing recently, but for this kick to really make it hit right, I think we need a little bit of saturation. And what the saturation does is it kind of glues together the sounds, because you're taking two very different sounds here, and then adding harmonics on top of them. And then what's going to happen then, when you do that, it's going to kind of fill in some of those spaces, like some of the harmonics that, say, like this one has that this other one doesn't. It's going to kind of fill in that gap a little bit. And thus, you get the glue. So that works really well for that. The key to this one is I have it on the medium curve setting. You can see we're not using that much drive, but if I put it back to the default, so you can see the difference. Just having it on this particular setting is going to make it hit a lot harder. And yeah, then we have these rave loops. So these are sort of like those like classic 90s, 2000s style techno loops. We have one for the hi-hats, and then one that's kind of more mid-range. And yeah, these are two where you kind of have to use loops, like you really only get this feel when you use these live loops like this, where it's been, like there's so much texture there because it's been sampled and resampled and resampled again. That like you really just have to use a loop. You can't really get that same feeling with programmed percussion. So we have those there. You'll notice though that if we're going to use two loops at the same time, we're very careful to make sure that they're not going to clash with each other. Like this one is in the high end, and this one is more in the mid-range. So now, when you put them together, they're going to sit well together versus having like two mid-rangey ones. They're just going to clash with each other. Then we have our open hi-hat. There's a nice fat 909 style hi-hat. You can hear that sits very well over the kick and over those two loops. And then we have the clap. So the way this clap is made is it's basically like a pretty standard 909 style clap. And then we have it going through a reverb. And then some overdrive. And then distortion is pretty important with this one because like when you play it with the whole drums, you don't just want like a little you really want to like it has to really smack like that. So the overdrive makes a big difference. And yeah, then we have the CMI vocal sample, which sounds like this. So yeah, this is the MIDI for this. I was trying to create one of those demonic dimensions style chord progressions, and really what it comes down to is you pick like 2 or 3 chords. It's gonna hang on that first one for 4 whole bars, and then you can either just go down to your second chord for the second 4 bars, or you could do 2 bars here, the second chord, and then 2 more bars with the third chord. So yeah, just kind of like picking one chord, and then it's changing the notes on top. These da 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 da. See, we get a lot of mileage there going from. Like once you start to do that, we're basically playing a chord progression with these. Like that's just F minor, D sharp major. So that's got its own chord progression, and then you're changing the progression in the root notes. So that's essentially how this type of lead line works. That's really all it is. It's just picking that root note, and then writing these chords on top, and sort of arpeggiating it. Now for the sound here, the reason why I called this a CMI vocal sample is that's where this vocal comes from. It's from this famous keyboard called the CMI Fairlight. If you have the Arturia suite, you'll notice that as you can see, you already have this. And then the way that I made this is essentially going in here, and what you can do is you go in here and you can change the actual like sounds. You go to browse here, and then if you look up choir, it's a bunch of these. And then you can go and add others in on these other ones here. Maybe like that one there. And there you go. So essentially that's how this sound is made. It's stacking those different vocal sounds inside of the Fairlight. And then what I did was I stacked those, and then I brought it into a sampler here. And then that kind of allows you to get this more like choppy, like. So you gotta make the sound and then bounce it down to audio. Or you can just use this sample link because it's at the description. And that's essentially how you create this vocal stab. Now, if you just try to grab any old vocal sample and make this, it's not really going to work. You really need that like vintage kind of texture that you're going to get from the CMI. But yeah, and then after that I just have a few effects. So the first thing is just this EQ. Here's without it. And then with it. So you can see, the sound without this is a little bit muddy. You know, it does have kind of like a lot of like low mid-range frequencies in it. So we're cutting out a lot of that and then boosting the highs a lot. And this might seem kind of like a crazy EQ. Like if we were doing mixing, like if you were at the final mixdown stage of your track and you did this kind of EQ, I would say, you know, it's not right. But in this case, it's really just for sound design. It's just to get this from this more like boxy, deep sound to something a bit more crisp and modern. And then I have this echo on 8th notes. Now this is really important as well. It's on the ping pong setting. And this is adding a lot of stereo width to the sound. If I turn it off, You can see without it, it's really missing something. You really want that like constant kind of like background delay there. It's just adding a lot to the sound that you might not even really notice on first listen. But again, when I turn it off, you really notice. And then we just have a bit of reverb, and that's it for the vocal stab. Then we have this old school stab, which if you listen, it just follows the chord progression. So yeah, this is just one of those classic like 90s rave stabs. Pretty sure it's called the cubic stab or something like that. And then what's happening here is we're just putting it through a few effects to kind of fit it into the track. So the first thing here is this amp. Here's without it. And then with it, you can see I've got the dry wet on 46.8%, so it's not completely distorted, but it's just adding a bit more texture to the sound, kind of bringing out the mids and the highs. Then we just have some reverb, giving the sound some space. And then finally, I just have a high-pass filter to make sure that it's not getting in the way of the low end. And yeah, then we have the 303. Now you'll notice the 303 is only playing one note. It's just F. And then this high F up top. But if you look at this chord progression, you'll notice that we're actually in C. And then F would be the fourth of that. So that's something that you want to keep in mind. If you have a 303 riff like this, it's not always just going to play your root note. Like if I put this to C, you can see we really don't get the right kind of like flavor musically. When we put it on the fourth here, now it's always going to sit really well with that chord progression, even when the chord progression changes. So yeah, the 303 isn't always going to play the root note, especially in a track like this where it's a bit more emotional but still that like aggressive 303 riff. Play around with different intervals that are in your scale. You know, maybe we might do the 5th. Or the 6th sounds cool. The minor 7th. Minor 3rd. Different stuff from the scale can kind of give you different feels musically, especially when it's just one note like this. Now, for the 303 sound, it's made with operator. What we have is we just have a saw wave going into a bandpass filter, and then we're automating both the filter frequency as well as the filter decay, the filter envelope decay, I should say. So yeah, as you would imagine, with any 303 sound, we're using the bandpass filter, and then I have kind of like a shorter envelope on it. I can see that. We're automating the decay. And essentially the goal of doing this, automating the filter frequency and the decay at the same time, just gives you like a lot more kind of a live sound. As you can hear, you know, the sound is just a lot more colorful, a lot more animated. And it's going to be a lot more exciting to listen to. So other than that, you can see we have the filter drive on. This is on the OSR setting. And then I also have the soft shaper on, and that's turned up all the way. And then the last thing here is this frequency to key. So all this is key tracking, meaning the higher the note you play, the more open the filter will be. The lower the note you play, the more closed the filter will be. So it's kind of good when you have a sound like this, which is jumping across two different octaves. If I turn that off, and then with it again, you can see it's just something that's giving a little subtle boost. Then we have the amp. Speaking of boost, you can see this is on the boost setting. So here's without this. And then with it. So, as you can see, the amp simulation is actually going to be really important for getting that modern kind of 303 sound. Like, to really get that proper crunch out of it, some type of amp distortion. You could use Waves GTR, you could use Guitar Rig, you could use the Ableton one, but it's really just a great way to get that more modern kind of crunchy 303 sound. Then we have some echo doing eighth notes, which is on the ping pong mode, and then also some short reverb. So here's without those. With the echo, and then with the reverb. So it's kind of like with that vocal stab. It's the type of sound that you might not always notice these things on, but when you get rid of them, it's gonna make a big difference. And the last thing here is this overdrive, which is not doing too much, but here's without it. And then with it, you can hear just makes it a little bit crunchier, kind of ties it all together at the end. And then I just have a high pass filter to make sure this isn't going to get in the way of the low end. And yeah, that's going to be it for the Theorem 3, and that's also going to be it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. As always, make sure to like this video as well as subscribe, and let me know what you think of this video in the comments. Like I said in the beginning, you can get the full project files, samples, MIDI, presets, everything like that from this video is available right at the top of the description, and if you're a patron on my Patreon, check there because it's already available. Thank you so much, guys, and I will see you tomorrow with another video.